Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining us at the Case for LNG as a Marine Fuel and the Development of LNG Bunkering in Hong Kong webinar, organized and hosted by the Business Environment Council, or BEC. I'm Wayne from BEC's Policy and Research team. A quick note to you that today's webinar will be recorded and later uploaded to BEC's YouTube channel. Please feel free to use the Q&A and chat functions located at the bottom of the screen if you have any questions for our speakers, and we will address them at the panel discussion near the end of this webinar. On behalf of BEC, I would like to express our gratitude to the supporting organizations for this event: the Hong Kong Liner Shipping Association, Hong Kong Shipowners Association, and the Netherlands Consulate General in Hong Kong and Macau. This webinar is the second of the two-part webinar series on LNG bunkering, and it's also a part of BEC's research and engagement on the topic. The first webinar was held last December, when we discussed the benefits and shortcomings of LNG as a marine fuel and heard an update on the offshore LNG terminal under construction. You can watch the full webinar on BEC's website or YouTube channel if you missed it last time. Today, we'll be shifting the focus to LNG bunkering with overseas experience and strategic recommendations for Hong Kong based on our latest research findings. Before I go into the details of the research findings, first, let me start by giving you some context of the shipping sector. So in 2018, the global shipping sector contributed around 3% of global carbon emissions, according to the International Maritime Organization, IMO, which translates to over a 9% growth compared with 2012 levels. And looking back at home in Hong Kong, ships have been the major contributors to air pollution, and it's also the primary source of sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and particulate matter emissions in 2018. Although we do expect sulfur emissions to drop from 2019 onwards after the enforcement of a 0.5% sulfur cap for ships entering the Pearl River Delta. To alleviate the shipping sector's environmental impact, policies and regulations are being formulated at both the international and local levels. For example, the IMO greenhouse gas reduction strategy sets out targets such as reducing the shipping sector's carbon intensity by 40% by 2030, and also to reduce at least 50% of absolute carbon emissions by 2050, which is approximately an 85% reduction per ship. And in November 2020, Hong Kong also pledged to become carbon neutral by the middle of this century, which will have significant implications for all sectors across Hong Kong, including shipping. And we're also expecting the government to publish their updated versions of the Climate Action Plan, as well as the Clean Air Plan in the second half of this year, to further cut down both air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. These targets will have to be met, and an early start for cleaner fuels in the marine sector, such as the use of LNG, will help with the transition to decarbonized shipping. So you may be wondering, why LNG? It is the lowest carbon fuel currently available to the shipping industry at scale and the most mature in terms of supply chain and engine technology. It is also a non-toxic fuel, which has a very good safety record. The fuel has been shipped around for more than 50 years without any major incidents at sea or in ports. While LNG can cut down and reduce air pollutant emissions, it is still a greenhouse gas, and its reduction potential is dependent on the amount of methane released in the process, which I'll get into in a moment. Another drawback for LNG is its requirement for transport and storage, as the fuel is typically stored at minus 160 degrees Celsius. So as I mentioned in my last slide, LNG is still a fossil fuel, and its main component is methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas, 86 times stronger than carbon dioxide over a short period of time, and also 34 times stronger over a 100-year time horizon. While this may be less of a problem if methane is completely combusted in the engine, methane may still be released unintendedly along the value chain, and also from incomplete combustion. While the amount of methane slip is largely dependent on the type of engine, two-stroke engines release less methane than four-stroke engines, and existing engine technologies are already able to reduce well-to-wake emissions, which is the life cycle emissions from fuel production, refining, transportation, and combustion by 4% to up to 21%, compared with conventional marine fuels. And ship equipment manufacturers like Forstella has cut methane slip from its dual fuel engines by 85% since 1993. And MAN Energy Solutions are also improving their engine designs, which can reduce methane slip by up to 50% and a potential of a 90% reduction. For the industry, there are also more than 20 oil and gas companies signed on to the methane guiding principles, which is a voluntary partnership with 5 principles that aims at reducing methane emissions along the natural gas value chain. And if we compare LNG to alternative fuels, just take a look at this comparison table of DNV's assessment on the viability of different fuels, where green means viable and red means there's still a long way to go. On the left of LNG, we have conventional fuels that are established and mature, but with poor emission performances. While on the right of LNG, there are clean and even zero emission fuels, but some of them are far from technologically mature or simply not available in large quantities. This makes it clear that while we acknowledge LNG is not a carbon-free fuel, it still has a major role to play as a transition option until other zero carbon solutions become market ready. So in the context of Hong Kong, for LNG ships to be refueled, Hong Kong first has to be able to provide LNG as a bunker fuel. Looking at the current natural gas value chain in Hong Kong, we import gas from different locations in the mainland for power generation through submarine pipelines. And we're also constructing an offshore LNG terminal in the south of Lantau that is scheduled for completion in 2022. The terminal will allow us to directly access worldwide market for carriers to deliver LNG to a floating storage and regasification unit, FSRU, that will then deliver natural gas in its gaseous form for power generation. But to complete the last mile of LNG bunkering, LNG has to be supplied to LNG-fueled ships, for example, through bunkering vessels. This process is also known as ship-to-ship bunkering. While there are also other bunkering options, such as shore-to-ship or truck-to-ship bunkering, they will either require permanent onshore structures or take up land space in port string operations, which will not be ideal for Hong Kong. And as with other commercial shipping fuels, LNG operations do present health and safety hazards. Therefore, the operational procedures that have been working well for the past decades must continue to be maintained in order to uphold the safety and efficiency of LNG bunkering operations. So these regulations and guidelines include licensing, procedure and safety guidelines, personnel competency, environmental sustainability, and also simultaneous operations. I won't go into too much technical details here, as there are already internationally developed and recognized standards to serve that purpose. For licensing, under the Gas Safety Ordinance, companies who manufacture, supply, or import LNG must submit their application to become a registered gas supply company to the Electrical and Mechanical Services Department, EMSD. These registered gas supply company has self-regulating duty to ensure the health and safety of workers and the public from gas risks. This is required on top of general vessel operating licenses issued by the Marine Department. As LNG bunkering is new to Hong Kong, overseas references such as the comprehensive licensing procedure in the Port of Rotterdam, which I'm sure Case will cover in his presentation, examines everything from ship safety, operational safety, nautical safety, and risk assessment of the operation before the licenses are actually issued. And in terms of safety procedures, LNG's extremely good safety track record highlights the importance of robust design standards, good operational and safety procedures, and the maintenance of safety equipment. These are also well described and proven by existing international standards and guidelines. For example, IMO's IGF and IGC codes provide mandatory criteria for the design, usage, equipment, and system arrangements for vessels operating with LNG. Other examples include the Society for Gas as a Marine Fuel, SGMF's guidelines for bunkering, and also the Chinese Classification Society's guideline for LNG fuel bunkering operations. So these also provide comprehensive guidance for LNG bunkering operations. In terms of personnel competency, Basic training should be required for the crew on how to handle LNG. The International Convention on Standards of Training, Certification, and Watchkeeping for Seafarers, the STCW Convention, sets out the minimum requirements for the crew, and it's also widely adopted and referenced when governments develop their policies and regulations. The STCW Convention provides guidance on special training requirements, such as health hazards and precautions, fire and pollution prevention, as well as the handling of cryogenic cargoes, such as LNG. Another area is environmental sustainability, which is often overlooked in the context of LNG bunkering. As I mentioned before, LNG is made up of mostly methane. So it is crucial for ports and operators to put in place rigorous measures that prevent methane release during the bunkering process. For example, the European Maritime Safety Agency, EMSA, has devoted a section in their guidance on methane release mitigation, calling for operators to mitigate relevant risks through, for example, boil-off gas management, maintenance, planning, and compatibility assessments. And then for simultaneous operation SimOps, it refers to two or more operations occurring at the same time at the same location that may interact or interfere with each other. In the context of LNG bunkering, a typical example is the loading and unloading of cargoes while an LNG fuel vessel is being bunkered. As these additional activities can lead to different parties being exposed to different risks, SimOps need to be carefully planned and executed. There are a number of international guidelines regarding SimOps. Using SGMF again as an example, they published a set of detailed risk assessment and management guidelines in stages for operations doing bunkering, as well as for port planning and ship design. So all of these examples are examples that guidelines and standards cover different aspects of LNG bunkering, and they can easily be considered in developing relevant standards for Hong Kong. So a quick recap of my presentation. LNG is a proven and available transition fuel to decarbonize the shipping sector, while we wait for other zero carbon alternatives to become mature. Methane slip undermines LNG's greenhouse gas reduction potential, but is currently being addressed by the industry and as well as engine manufacturers. Ship-to-ship bunkering should be the preferred option for Hong Kong if we were to adopt LNG bunkering. And most importantly, there's an abundance of internationally recognized and proven standards and guidelines. So there's no need for Hong Kong to reinvent the wheel on this. And the next step for BEC is to finalize and publish our short report on the topic within April and start engagement work with the government. And we hope they can consider reviewing and adopting these standards and guidelines to enable LNG bunkering in Hong Kong. So thanks. And now may I invite Mr. Kees Boon to join us from the Netherlands. Kees is Senior Safety Advisor, Harbour Master's Policy Department from the Port of Rotterdam. He will share with us Rotterdam's experience in planning and development of LNG bunkering services and operations. Kees, please. Can you share your screen as well?
Yeah, I will share my screen. Good afternoon, all. I hope you can see my screen now.
Yeah, we can see it.
Good. Ladies, it's flickering. Oi, oi, oi. Yeah, I can see it. Yeah. You start all over again.
Sure, take your time. All right.
Now it's steady, I think.
Okay, now it's all right.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Good, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, good morning for the viewers from Europe. I was asked to tell you something about the LNG in LNG bunkering in the port of Rotterdam. And at this moment, it is a major industry already. It started in 2011. In 2011, we had the first request to bunker a vessel with LNG. Well, there was the request, how can we do it? And it was a small inland vessel, that have to use a tank truck to bunker. And of course, we got a large import terminal for LNG already in the port of Rotterdam. It opened also in 2011. And That makes us, yeah, well, we wander around, we look around, and we saw there was no regulation at all for LNG bunkering. There was no technical description for LNG bunkering at all. And that was 2011. And now 2021. You can see 10 years later, we got a major industry for LNG bunkering. Just see if I can go to the next slide. So it is daily business. A daily business, every day ships are bunkered with LNG in the port of Rotterdam, sometimes with tank trucks, sometimes with vessels. You can see here an example of one of those bunkering of a very special vessel, a crane pontoon, one of the largest crane vessels in the world. And she got about 10,000 cubics of LNG on board. You can see it somewhere in the port. Later on, I tell you where we allow the bunkering. But we have customers for LNG bunkering, and those customers are container vessels, tankers. So also tankers are changing over to LNG. And of course, we got the cruise vessels and the inland vessels as well. So it started in 2011, just with a simple LNG bunkering from a tank truck. You can see an example in the corner of the presentation. It's a 110 meter vessel, wheelhouse on forward. Aft, you can see the LNG tank containers for the storage on board. And the LNG is delivered by a tank truck. Now, that was 2011. I think we started with multiple tank truck bunkering, and there you talk about 30, 40, 50 cubics already. We started with multiple tank truck bunkering at, I think, 2014. Multiple tank truck bunkering, well, that's more or less feasible till about a quantity of 300 cubics. So as long as you are around 300, 400 cubics, it is doable to do it by tank trucks. Cost a lot of time. That's the problem with tank truck bunkering. But for the larger amounts, of course, you need vessels, ship-to-ship vessels for doing the bunkering. But meanwhile, we are also doing the purging and the cooling down and the gassing up. So it's not only LNG bunkering when you start to facilitate vessels that sail on LNG, but you also must be aware that you need a spin-off activities around this LNG bunkering. For instance, maybe you need some maintenance to do on the vessels. So you have to prepare your shipyards for LNG vessels coming to the shipyard. Vessels will come, have to gas free maybe, if they have to do some repair on their tanks or the LNG bunkering. So you need also facilities for purging, for cooling down, for gassing up, for gassing free. Mostly that's done by mobile equipment like tank truck or mobile incinerators. But that's something that you must be aware of. It's not only the LNG bunkering that is required in a port for when vessels visit your port. Now, in 2014, the first vessel arrived, first bunker vessel arrived. We started the licensing process for that. Tell you more about it later. But here you can see that in Rotterdam we have different bunker vessel operators. We also have different suppliers of the LNG. And the capacity varies from, well, let's say 18 cube until 18,000 cubes. So you can see over here, this is a vessel about 1800 cubics, an inland vessel with inland vessel certificates. Here you got the LNG London. The LNG London got a capacity about 3,000 cubes LNG, also an inland vessel. And then we have several vessels licensed in the range of 6,000, 7,000 cubics of LNG. And of course, those are seagoing vessels. And our largest licensed vessel in the port of Rotterdam is the Gas Agility. And the Gas Agility can deliver above 17,000 cubics of LNG. So there is a wide range of demand on capacity, and there is also a wide range of delivery. Normally the large container vessels, well, this one is really a large one. It's about 17,000, but around 8,000, 10,000 cubics. That's a normal amount for the mid-size container vessels. So how did we deal with it? Because I told you in 2011 we had the first request to allow an LNG bunkering, and well, there wasn't a regulation, there weren't any procedures. We even had no idea what was safe for LNG bunkering. And that's something, yeah, it was quite a journey to invent it all and to establish a safety framework for LNG bunkering in our port. And I will tell you some more about that. So, oh well, this is the last sheet on the LNG bunkering. It's a growing amount. It started very small, 18 cubes, 36 cubes for inland vessels in 2011 already. The large seagoing vessels had a demand from 2018, and you can see it is a large growing demand. And now if the gas agility will do a delivery to a vessel every 2 weeks, 70,000 cubics, you can imagine what the number will be next year. So it is really a booming business. And yeah, we have to develop a safety framework for that. And the safety framework always starts with the regulations, the port bylaws, because normally spoken, it is not allowed to do an LNG bunkering, well, to do a bunkering of a fuel with a flash point lower than 55 degrees Celsius. So you have to change regulations. We started by changing the port bylaws. And there we make the first decision, because you can make a decision, do you make a safety framework with a lot of regulations for the ships to be fueled? Or do you make a safety framework with the regulations focused on the bunker operator? And we decided to focus our regulations on the bunker operator, because we will have, well, we now have 9 bunker operators operational in our port. It is more easy to control the safety of 9 bunker operators than 50 or 70 different LNG fueled vessels. So we focused our regulations on the bunker operator and the bunker vessel, of course. But first we did a spatial planning. We look into scenarios, bunker scenarios, and then we have mandatory tools we have to use based on national legislation to protect, well, to make sure that the activities with dangerous goods are at enough distance to populated areas. So we first look into the bunker scenarios. We use this tool, this mandatory tool. We calculated the safety contours. That's something that's obliged in the Netherlands. We calculated the safety contour, and we make sure that we plan all the bunker operations in an area that the safety contour never will reach populated areas. So that's an external safety item we have to do in the Netherlands. And well, if you do that, you will have a bunker map. You can see an example of this bunker map, the green areas and the yellow areas. Well, the green areas you can do in bunkering, and in the yellow areas you got some extra restrictions, for instance, on the bunker rate or so. And we give a license to the bunker operators. We say, okay, you only are allowed to operate in the green or yellow areas of this bunker map. If you want to operate outside the bunker map, on a not colored place on the bunker map, then you need to ask for extra permission, and then you need an exemption. And well, I'll tell you more about that when I tell you something about the bunkering of cruise vessels. So, okay, you do a spatial planning. As a port, you do a spatial planning. I'm sure you have to do that in Hong Kong at the same way. Looking for places where it is safe and on enough distance to populated areas to do this LNG bunkering. Mostly it is on national level how you have to deal with it. So spatial planning, we also look into nautical safety, because not all waterways are safe enough to have gas tankers alongside another vessel. So you must look in, for instance, in areas where you have a maneuvering circle for vessels, or areas where you have a lot of short sea vessels coming on high speed, frequently passing the vessels, or on too narrow waterways. Well, those items you have to do the nautical study for, to make sure that it is also on a safe nautical position. Right, that's one. So we did the spatial planning. We developed a bunker map to say where you can do the bunkering on a safe way and to be compliant with all the national legislation. Then beside that, we did we prepared our enforcement organization. Of course, we check the vessels before we allow them to do the bunkering, but of course during the operation itself we like to have well-educated, well-trained enforcement officers to check the operational safety during this bunkering, to see if the compliant of the work is done compliant with all the regulations. That's important. So you must need some enforcement. It can be done by, for instance, a port state or a coast guard, or, well, in our case, in the Port of Rotterdam, they are officers from the port authorities. You also have to, as a port, prepare your incident response organizations. It means you look into the incident scenarios with LNG bunkering, and you developed an incident response scenarios. And you train that with your incident response organizations, and well, then that part of the bow tie is also covered. So then you have made your area around the environment, around the bunkering safe, but then the bunkering itself have to be safe as well, of course, the operation bunkering. So how do we do that? We check the bunker vessel operators. We do an audit on the bunker vessel operators. Tell you some more about that later. We do an audit on the bunker operators, make sure that they are have a good quality management, a good safety management in their office. And we check the vessel as well to see if everything that's invented at the office also landed on the board of the vessels. We had a problem, of course, in 2011. What's your safety reference? What is safe? Because there was a lack of regulations, so there weren't any regulations that tell you what is safe. So we look into the best practice of the industry, and that's why these documentation just shown to you, like the best practice from Ajax, the branch organization of the class companies, or the publication of the SGMF, branch organizations for LNG fueled vessels, are so important. Those publications tells you what's safe. So during this audit, we look, of course, if there is enough safety management performed by the bunker operator, as well if they can comply with the best practice of the industry. So the publications of the SGMF. Those are the things we check during the audit, and then we know that on system level, the bunker operator is qualified to do a safe bunker operation. Okay, and then the LNG fueled vessels itself, I already told you the most of the regulations are focused on the bunker operator. So the bunker operator is not allowed to operate without a license, is not allowed to operate outside the bunker map. But for the LNG fueled vessels, we have some regulations. For instance, the vessel has to wear the B flag during the bunker operation. It means in the Dutch legislation that other vessels have to pass on 50-meter distance. That's important. So you keep your safety area at the waterside as well. The LNG fueled vessels also have to prepare themselves and doing also a check on the bunker scenarios to see what kind of control zones that are necessary on board of the vessel, as well maybe on board of on the shore side. So that's something we regulated for the LNG fueled vessels. And of course, we made some regulations for simultaneous operation. Tell you more about that. Of course, during a bunkering, you like to do simultaneous operations because that saves a lot of time in the port. So the turnaround time will remain as low as possible. But of course, it has to be done safe. And then two parties are involved. Of course, the LNG fueled vessel that will do the simultaneous operations, and the terminal, because the terminal is doing the loading and the unloading. The terminal is doing the. So then you have to take care of the simultaneous operations. How do we do that? You can read it all in this publication of the SGMF. But mainly it is done on a way that you look in credible leak scenarios, so credible incident scenarios. If you have a credible leak scenario, you know for your kind of bunkering how much LNG can be spilled, and of course LNG will evaporate into natural gas. You can do then you can use a tool, do a gas dispersion study. Then you know where this gas will go when you have a spill. And in the areas where you have a high concentration of gas, you can say, okay, that's a control zone. We have to do extra risk mitigation. And so once you have your control zones based on a gas dispersion study, you do a hazard and you look into the possible activities you still can do on an acceptable safety level during an LNG bunkering in those control zones. And of course, during the operation itself, you must have an enforcement and a control on this control zones to make sure that everybody is compliant with what's in this risk mitigation, came out of this risk mitigation. That's easy. That's for containing handling, and that's a way to avoid terrible incidents like a container falling on an LNG tanker. That should be avoided. This is an example. Sometimes it happens, but even on an LNG tanker, the LNG tanker is protected by all kinds of risk mitigation to make sure that the effect will be low when you have an incident like this. Okay, going back a few views back. What I told you, simultaneous operations, that's something that's in the port bylaws as well. You can only do simultaneous operations according to our port bylaws if you make sure, if you can tell the port authorities that you can do it on a safe way. And on a safe way means you have to do this hazard. You have to make sure you know your control zones. These control zones are all mentioned in your bunker management plan. Also, the required risk mitigation is mentioned in your bunker management plan. And later on, of course, the bunker operator have to combine the bunker management plan together with the bunker management plan of the bunker vessel into a joint plan of operation. And the work, the operational work, the real bunkering have to be performed conform the joint plan of operation. And that's for the terminal, that's for the bunker vessel, and that is for the LNG propelled vessel. It sounds quite easy, but it was a long journey to develop this safety framework, because the ports have to do all kind of risk calculation, all kind of risk assessment, nautical safety studies, and then you've got your bunker map. You have to regulate something for your enforcement, for your incident response, and at the end you get your licensing system that have to be in your port bylaws. The bunker operator, well, of course they have the vessel needs the proper certificates, but they also have to do the risk assessments and the hazards and the HAZOPs. And then you got your bunker management plan, then you know how to perform safe bunkering. And of course, the bunker vessel operator will be audited, as well as the vessel that will be audited on the way of the IPH prescribed. And then during the first bunkering, you also will have a reality check. You can see that the vessel operator of the LNG fueled vessel have to do the risk assessments and have to do the gas dispersion studies to make sure that they can have a proper bunker management plan taking into account also the simultaneous operations. They also have to develop a mooring plan, of course, because they will have a gas carrier alongside that will have to be more safe during the bunkering. There have to be a compatibility study performed in between the bunker operator and the LNG fueled vessel. And the terminal. The terminal itself also have to prepare itself, because once a bunkering, an LNG bunkering will be performed, there will be active control zones. And in these control zones, you have certain restrictions. It is not wise to keep the spreader of your container train above the PV outlet of the vessel, for instance. Many more risk mitigation is required, and the terminal must be prepared for that. They must educate, instruct their personnel. They must know about the bunkering, and even quite simple things like at the end of the bunkering, the bunker vessel will start to spray the lines with a water hose to heat up the LNG inside, so it will evaporate. So it is to clear the lines. But some people, when they are not instructed why it is done, will think that they try to get rid of an incident, of a leakage or something like that. So make sure people understand LNG, understand the LNG bunkering, and are aware of the things they will see, and that they will recognize the things they see, and that they know what's in the joint plan of operations. Those things have to be trained and instructed on the terminal itself. Now, okay, we have luckily a few tools we developed within the International Association for Ports and Harbors, and then especially in the Clean Marine Fuels Working Group. And in the Clean Marine Fuels Working Group, we developed LNG bunker checklists, operational checklists. We developed them together with the industry. And that's during the bunkering. Of course, the terminal have to fill in the list, the LNG fueled vessel have to fill in the list, and of course the bunker operator also have to fill in the list. Then we have the audit tool. So the port operators can use the audit tool from the EAPH to check the quality of the bunker operators, and you can use that for the decision if you will license the bunker operator. So that's also for a port a very important tool. And then for the port authorities again, we developed an LNG ready terminal document, and there a terminal can read how they can prepare themselves for LNG bunker operation. And there is also a checklist for the port authorities to check the terminal to see if the preparedness is sufficient. So those tools, they are available on the Clean Marine Fuels website. You can download them for free even. So that is one of the tips I can give you. Go to this check. This is the link. Go to this website and look into those papers. Now and then at the end, and also as a bridge to the presentation of Tom, this is a bunkering of a cruise vessel. The cruise vessel is bunkered by the LNG London. This is this inland barge that can deliver about 3,000 cubics, and this is really a bunkering of 3,000 cubics LNG. The cruise terminal in Rotterdam is in the middle of the city, in the city center. You can see the high-rise building behind it. High-rise buildings, there's mainly, well, some offices, but also living quarters. So people are living over there, and then people are going to restaurants over there on the pier. So that's important. And even here you can see this window. This window is the window of my office. So I'm always looking on top of the cruise vessels when I'm in the office. This is an area outside this bunker map. And outside the bunkers map, it means we have to do additional risk assessments. So we did additional nautical risk assessments for especially this location. We look into passing vessels and the frequency of the passing vessels and the energy inside passing vessels. Of course, we did this mandatory external safety calculations, and we did also a lot of additional risk assessments. We even did CFD modeling, and the CFD modeling, that's an dispersion modeling to prove that even if you got an incident on this side of the vessel, so normally spoken, it will be in between the both vessels where you have your layer of LNG when you got spill. What will happen? What will evaporate? Where will the gas go? Where will the floating LNG on the water go? So that's all be calculated in a CFD modeling. And with this CFD modeling, we proved that the cruise vessel acts as a shield. So the shore side is shielded off. There is a barrier in between the place where you can have the spill and the shore side where the people live. And that's why the people at the shore side are protected. And that's why we can say, okay, this is a safe activity on this location. So additional risk assessment proof you can do it safe in the middle of your town. Well, especially for these specifications. So this is the end of my story. Thank you. Oh, yeah. No, too early. Sorry. I like to show you a small insight in the future. You can see, by the way, the same page from a DNV study in the previous presentation. For me, most important are those lower lines, because that's about safety. And of course, you can see for LNG, everything is covered, everything is green. Okay, you can discuss that a little bit, because of course LNG itself will not burn, but when it evaporates you have natural gas and that will really burn. So maybe it should be a little bit red in this book, but okay, that's good. But all those other items also have to be solved. We can use the same safety framework what we use for LNG in the port of Rotterdam. So we will do audits. We will do the preparation of the incident response and our officers, our own enforcement officers. We will do, of course, the spatial planning for the operation of the bunkering of all those other fuels as well, including ammonia. And you see already that for inland navigational vessels, the smaller vessels, well, they're already starting to use hydrogen as an alternative fuels, and this year. Then we will have the first inland vessels sailing on hydrogen, still pressurized hydrogen. We will also have some inland vessels that will sail full electric. It means they get a container on board, and this container is loaded with accus, and it will deliver electricity to an electrical propelled vessel. And if the container is empty, you take it off, put a new container on top, like changing a battery, although this is a very large battery. And the same will be done for the inland navigational vessels on hydrogen. That is also, the hydrogen is brought on board with tube containers, we call them. So also a container with tubes with pressurized hydrogen inside will placed on board, and the empty one will take off. And that's the way to bunker. We call it swapping, container swapping, containment system swapping. Of course, we already have about 15 LNG propelled LNG inland vessels. It's a growing number. It will be about 40 at 2025. In seagoing vessels, we will have the first demo for methanol bunkering in 2 months now. So that will be the start of the bunkering of methanol and the start of the infrastructure for methanol. And then a little bit later, we also will have inland navigational vessels on liquid hydrogen, and the seagoing vessels, besides of methanol and LNG, will change over to ammonia. We expect our first ammonia bunkering in 4 years now. We're working on it in a program. There is a trend, of course. You have your single fixed systems will be changed in modular and hybrid systems. Of course, from internal combustion engines or diesels going to fuel cell technology in combination with electrical propulsion. Hydrogen, of course, will be brought on board as hydrogen as such, but also as hydrogen carriers, LOSA, ammonia, natrium borohydride, or other metal hydrides. And then, of course, most of the fuels will start as or black, still fossil, or gray. Then you have carbon capture to make sure that there will be no CO2 emission, to blue and to green. And that's also for LNG. We will have a drop in from bio-LNG and synthetic LNG later on. And for hydrogen, same, it's now still gray, made from natural gas, but later on it will be blue with carbon capture during the process, and then later green when you've got your electrolyzers in place. So, and this is really the end of my story. Thank you.
Okay, Kees, thanks for the very informative update on how the port does planning and management with LNG bunkering operations. I've also seen that you've shown a picture of the Carnival cruise, which segues very nicely into our next speaker, Mr. Tom Strang, who is the Senior Vice President, Maritime Affairs of Carnival Corporation and PLC, who will share their experience in using LNG as a marine fuel for their cruises. Tom, please, the floor is all yours.
Well, thank you very much, Wayne, and good morning, good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me. I'm assuming you can hear me all okay.
Yeah, we can.
Right, and now let me
share your screen. Yeah.
Let me just find if I can share my screen. I think that's this one. Can you see the first slide of my presentation?
Perfect.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to describe a little bit around our LNG journey in Carnival. First of all, hang on a second, I have to get to the right one. Yeah, so this is who we are, Carnival Corporation and PLC. We're the largest leisure company in the world from the point of view of numbers of people traveling on our ships, in normal circumstances, I would say. Today, as everyone's aware, in the COVID environment, we've only got one ship sailing at the moment, but we have 9 cruise line brands, and in normal operations, we would normally have about 200,000 guests at sea at any one time. We've got 93 ships. Our fleet has contracted a little bit in the last year as we've removed some of the less efficient older ships from our fleet by either sale or recycling. But from the point of view of the LNG story, we have 4 LNG-powered cruise ships today at sea. None of them are operating in commercial service right now, but they're all operating on LNG. And we've been operating them on LNG throughout the pause period that we have. We have another 14 ships on order between now and the end of 2025, of which 7 will be LNG powered. And these are our largest ships. These are the largest ships we have in our fleet. And the example of which is the Carnival Mardi Gras, which you saw in the back of Kees's picture, and you see in the picture that I have behind me. She is the latest of our LNG fueled vessels, and she is due to start operation in a couple of months' time in South Florida. All right, let me just find the next slide. So I normally just like to put it, where we are in perspective, and you'll have seen from Kees's slides how much the LNG market has grown. But if you look at, as a company like Carnival, of the 360 million tons of LNG that's traded globally in 2020, we've only bunkered just under 60,000 tons since 2018. That is approximately a quarter of one QMax LNG carrier. But as Kees has said, and that number is almost, but that can be very quickly overtaken by the bunkering you're now seeing in Rotterdam with the CMA CGM ships happening. But we've done 67 bunker operations so far, all of which have been incident-free. And that really is very, very important. I think what Kees described in his presentation is really the key to this. LNG is safe. And what we've done so far is we've really emphasized and really ensured that that safety is there by participating in groups, whether it's through SGMF, IAPH, our own training establishments or others, and building upon the enviable safety record that the LNG industry has had to date. We've got 4 ships, as I said previously, at sea at the moment, all LNG fueled. Each can hold around about 3,600 cubic meters of LNG. That's enough to operate for between 10 and 14 days, depending on the type of itineraries we have. We have another 9 ships coming. There's around about 191 LNG fuel ships in operation worldwide today. There's another 251 on order, of which around about 30 more cruise ships are coming in the next 5 years. But really, what's really important as well is to understand that, you know, from a what does that mean from a human perspective? There is, you know, as Wayne and Case have mentioned, there is a real need to ensure you've got people that are highly competent and very well trained. And we've managed to train in our own in-house training establishment, 250 officers to IGF advanced level on our ship-specific trainer. And we are lucky enough to have that capability in-house. And I'll describe a little bit more of that later on. Question I often get asked by those people who are worried about the use of LNG, and they've heard stories about methane number, about problems with impurities in the LNG. Of all that bunkering we've done, the average methane number has been 81 over the last 3 years. And that really is good, because typically the type of engines we use in particular, which is the medium speed 4-stroke engines, they prefer to see a higher methane number. And what we're seeing at the moment is something that we didn't expect, because we had expected, with the prevalence that we do bunkering in the Mediterranean, to see a slightly lower methane number, but actually it's held up very well. So that's good news. I've used this slide many, many times over the last 3 years, but nothing has changed from our perspective. It's still, you know, there is still a really good case, both commercially, environmentally, and from a decarbonisation pathway for LNG as a marine fuel. This is a picture of Aida Nova bunkering in Barcelona. It is the best in class fuel for emissions, local emissions. It solves nearly all the issues you have. Well, it solves all the issues we've ever had in port with regards to sulfur emissions, with regards to NOx emissions and particulate emissions, because the local air quality benefits from having ships operating on LNG. It's increasingly available. You've seen from Case how in Rotterdam the number of bunker vessels has grown, and we've seen more and more ports now getting bunker vessels in, you know, online. Yes, it hasn't moved as fast as we'd have liked it to move, and there are still some spaces or places in the world where we are challenged to find bunker operations. But touch wood, to date, we've managed to do bunkering wherever we've needed to. Very often that's meant we've had to be the first. That's not always the easiest thing, but I'll talk about that in a minute. But yes, it's non-polluting. In other words, from spills, it doesn't cause any pollution. It evaporates. There are safety considerations to be taken into account, but Case went into those. We have a standardized operation. You know, the one thing that you can find with LNG bunkering is it's a standardized operation. You don't have any of the challenges that you have elsewhere. With different types of connections, different types of techniques, it's become very standardized. There's very good regulation out there now, both from an industry perspective, but also we're seeing more and more that the regulations are beginning to standardize. Still a little bit of work to go there in different parts of the world, but we can talk about that a bit more as well. It's very competitively priced today. Certainly we see that LNG is maintaining a good discount to MGO in nearly all locations, and in some locations you can beat HFO. So from that perspective, it's doing well. And it really does give you a pathway to the next generation of decarbonized net zero fuels. You can have liquefied biogas, liquefied synthetic methane as direct drop-in fuels. And so you will have no change to infrastructure, no change to the supply side. So that really is some advantages there as well. And you'll see down the side, I've just put some numbers up there, but there's a lot of reports out there today which talk about this. So what's been our LNG journey? And on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see up the top here, this is the Hummel LNG power barge that we cooperated with partners in Hamburg to supply shoreside electricity through generation of clean electricity using LNG in the port of Hamburg. That was our first experience with LNG. We then moved on to the Ida Prima and Ida Perla, which were the first cruise ships that were able to operate on LNG import via a truck to ship operation. And as Case will remember, this was quite challenging in a number of ports to get permissions for operation on the quayside. These were ships which didn't have any LNG tanks on board because at the time the rules didn't allow for cruise ships to be built with LNG tanks on board. But this was not an effective way, not an efficient way of doing things. It helped us enormously in our pathway and our learning experience. But at the end of the day, what we really found is that you've got to build ships with tanks on board, that you can take advantage of the fact that the real estate on the shore side, which we use for our operations, isn't being impacted. And you can then use large scale drops from LNG bunker vessels in different locations. And you'll see there, we've got, we've done over 67 ship-to-ship bunker operations since 2018. In fact, that's probably up over 70 now since I put this presentation together, because we're still doing those. We did one a couple of days ago in Barcelona. We've used 6 different bunker vessels, and we've had no incidents or accidents at all in those operations. Where we've carried out bunkering, you can see here, mainly all in Europe, from Bremerhaven through to Barcelona, to Haugesund in Norway and La Spezia. We've done it in Tenerife, which is at the end of a very long supply chain, but working very closely with our supplier Shell, with the local authorities in the Canary Islands, we were able to get those operations all authorized and certified. Part of the challenge is, though, that when you go into a place or a port where there's never been any LNG, either as a fuel or from for loading as from a terminal or delivery to a shore facility, a lot of authorities are not used to this, and they therefore need some help. Certainly, as Case mentioned, the IAPH, SGMF, CLNG, these are all organizations which can help enormously in that preparation. Throughout Europe as well, EMSA's put together some guidelines. We've worked through the Cruise Lines Industry Association, MedCruise, Cruise Europe, and those different organizations to ensure that the lessons that are learned are shared. And I would encourage organizations to reach out to sister organizations elsewhere and bring on board the lessons that have been learned, both from the point of view of the regulation, but also from the procedures and processes that are used. One of the other things that I think is really important there is that joining those membership organizations will help enormously. The other thing that I think is, you look around the world, in Singapore, in Hong Kong, and we've been to Hong Kong to talk to different parts of the organizations there in the past, and the States now, but we're seeing more and more operation taking place in the USA. And for us, we have to look at all those locations where we're going to be placing cruise ships in the future. And that could potentially be Hong Kong, of course, and we would love to see more operation developed in the Southeast Asian region. I mentioned before training. Training is really important. Obviously, when you think about one of these large cruise ships, it could carry up to 6,000 guests on board. We'll have over 1,200 crew members on board, probably for those larger ships, up to 2,000 crew members on board. There's only a small cadre that needs to be trained to the highest levels and highest standards, which is the IGF advanced level. We have the benefit of being able to, we have our own bunker rig, which you'll see in the picture here, that we can move around in our training establishment in the Netherlands, the Arison Center for Simulator Maritime Training. We've managed to bring on board the manufacturers, the OEM equipment suppliers, to be able to give us type-specific simulator-based training systems, as well as the hardware that's involved. We've got those type-specific training rigs as well, so that when we make changes, or if we need to do some investigation, if we've found that there are some challenges on board in the operation, which does happen from time to time, particularly with new equipment, then we can simulate those in the training center and resolve those issues very quickly as well. And I think for us, the advantage we've seen is that the IGF code advanced level is an important part of the training, but ideally, if you can then train your officers on the equipment they're going to find on board the ships, that's really important. And that's given us the opportunity before they even go on board. And it's not possible to go out into the market and just suddenly find 60, 70 LNG trained officers. They're already rare commodity, and therefore their costs are high. So if you can go through this and train your own people, that's an enormous advantage that you can have. And we've certainly found that this has worked well for us, and we'll continue to do that going forwards. I'm going up to the end of my presentation because I really just, we are absolutely committed to LNG. We think it's the best fuel that you can have. It helps us on our decarbonisation journey. And you'll hear a lot of people, raising concerns around LNG. It's not the right fuel. It's not, it's a dead end. It's not the final solution. No, it's not, but it does help us enormously to get to where we need to be. As Wayne mentioned at the beginning, there's a lot of discussion at the regulatory level about the decarbonisation journey moving forwards. We managed to peak our emissions, our carbon emissions in 2011. We believe that by working together with others in this sector and in the industry and outside of industry, frankly, in the financial sectors, in the academia, that you can only do this by working as a team. We've joined Getting to Zero along with a number of other ship operators, banks, financial institutions, OEM manufacturers, because we're all committed to getting as close to net zero by 2050 as we can. Ideally, we'll be having our first zero emission cruise ships in the mid-30s. But if you ask me now what they're going to be fueled on, I can't tell you. What I do know is that if we begin to see more availability of net zero LNG, whether that's through biomethane or synthetic methane, then we can clearly and quickly get towards the goals that we need to. What's important, though, is that you continue to invest in making your cruise ships or your vessels more efficient. That will always help. That will save you money, it will save you emissions, and it will give you those returns on investment very often more quickly than you expected, particularly as we see in a marketplace where these alternative fuels are going to be much more expensive. We've managed to reduce our carbon footprint by 30% since 2005. We firmly believe that with what we're doing today, purely on the energy saving and the introduction of our LNG ships, that we can meet the 40% rate reduction that's necessary by 2030 that the IMO has mandated. And this will help us on our pathway to those net zero emission ships of the future. We have to work to reduce methane slip, particularly for the engine types we're using. These are more prone to methane slip, but even with that methane slip, we're getting at least a 15% well-to-wake reduction in carbon emissions. And considering how challenging it is today to find 5 to 10% of on anything else, this is really important. You need to work together, though, with the suppliers and the technology providers to look at how you can reduce those emissions and the pathways. We continue to encourage the development of shore power. We think that has a key role to play in the decarbonisation journey, particularly for the cruise sector. As I've already mentioned, we've got, the LNG it's a facilitator. It fully supports the decarbonisation journey. The use of drop-in fuels is going to be essential for assets such as ours in the cruise industry that have a lifespan of 30 to 40 years compared to an average of 17 years or 20 years in other segments in the maritime industry. We've got a lot of tail that still needs to be converted in the process. And that's going to help us, and LNG is going to help us get there. If we did 20% of liquefied biomethane, then that would give us a CO2 reduction of about 34% in total for our engine types. And so that would be an enormous advantage. But we also need to continue to work on fuel cells and batteries. In Carnival, we've got a project to put 10 megawatts of battery on one of our cruise ships to allow it to operate for about 30 to 40 minutes inside ports and harbors while it's maneuvering or coming alongside. The fuel cell, we're putting a 250 kilowatt fuel cell on Aida Nova, one of the LNG fuel ships, although we won't run the fuel cell on LNG, we'll run it on methanol. But there are opportunities we're looking at to putting LNG powered fuel cells on board ships as well, which will convert the LNG into hydrogen and carbon dioxide, store the carbon dioxide or bring it back, and then be available to run on hydrogen. Or if it uses the biofuel or the synthetic fuel, then it's a net zero effect of using the carbon dioxide. And then, as Case has mentioned, we're looking at these, whether it's liquid hydrogen, methanol, ammonia, synthetic LNG. We're all working towards looking at those, and that is taking a lot of the time within the industry. While we've been in pause, we haven't done nothing. We've had the opportunity to start to look more closely at a number of these fuels, but it is going to be challenging because, as Wayne and Case have both said, these fuels are not widely available yet. You know, the only fuel you can take today to get you to where you need to be is LNG. So really the conclusions from my perspective, it's the cleanest fuel competitively available today. It is safe and it's fully compatible with liquefied biomethane and liquefied synthetic methane going forwards, both from an onboard perspective and in the supply infrastructure. And that makes it pretty unique in our view. And whilst it might not be the final solution, it is not the dead end that other people would have you believe. And it is a key facilitator towards the net zero future. So thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions. I don't know, Wayne, how we want to do that, but thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Tom. And we're glad to hear your very optimistic view on LNG as a marine fuel. Now, may I also invite Mr. Roberto Ginetta, Chairman of the Hong Kong Liner Shipping Association, to join us on the panel with Case and Tom. They will also be joined by Mr. Simon Ng, Director in Policy and Research here at BEC, who will be today's moderator. Again, if you have any questions for the speakers, please feel free to type them out using the Q&A function. Simon, over to you.
Well, thank you, Wayne. I hope you can all hear me. And first of all, I want to thank Case and Tom and of course, Wayne for your presentation. I think there's a lot of information and I can tell the level of interest is very high. Now, originally we planned to end this webinar in 10 minutes. I think, we probably have a lot of questions. So I have taken the liberty to extend the panel discussion for another 10 minutes. So we'll have altogether 20 minutes for discussion. I hope the audience will mind because I can tell we have 96 of you actually still staying put. And if you have any question, please type them into the chat box and we will address those questions towards the end of the discussion. Now, I have Roberto sitting right next to me, joining me at BEC. So he's chairman of Hong Kong Liner Shipping Association. Maybe I'll start with him. Roberto, can you say a few words about the association and also the association's position on LNG as a fuel and LNG bunkering in Hong Kong?
Sure. The Hong Kong Liner Shipping Association is comprised of the ocean line carriers, container liner operators, moving cargo around the world and obviously touching Asia. In terms of the topic that we're talking about, I do believe that the world's top future ports will be those that strategically focus on accommodating bunkering for multiple types of fuel, including LNG. I think that this is a clear way forward. If you look at it strategically, there are 55,000 container vessels in the world produced, and we carry 90% of the world's goods. That's $12 billion worth of goods. Hong Kong is not an exception. Hong Kong, 90% of what we use every day comes on board these vessels. So it is essential for us to continue catering for this world transport to continue. These 55,000 vessels, however, do produce 2% of the world's carbon emissions. And the direction of where we need to go is very clear. There's mandates in every country, including Hong Kong. And there is the International Maritime Organization that is setting guidelines on where we need to go. We need to reduce the O2 carbon dioxide emissions. That is clear. The problem is that today's technology does not provide for a form of propulsion that reaches those targets, particularly for long distance, big container liner vessels. Now, we've heard from Tom and Kes examples of how LNG is being used in Europe and also other types of fuels. In the container liner industry and the shipping business, we are looking very carefully at a number of alternatives, hydrogen, ammonia. There are advantages, disadvantages, but none of them are available in the market today except for LNG. Now, as has been said, LNG will not get us there. It does achieve some efficiencies. There are some reductions that can be caught, but it will get us partially there. So for example, the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, has set some interim targets. LNG will enable us to hit some of those interim targets. So that is a good thing. Secondly, and I think one of the big things is that of all of the fuel options that we have today, the only one that is commercially in use today for container liner business is LNG. So we know that there are a number of shipping lines that are going down that direction. Not all the shipping lines have committed to LNG, but it is clear that there is a growth in this market. The biggest market for new builds is in the LNG sector. Now, one of the characteristics about LNG is that it requires bigger storage space. Shipping lines, container lines are obviously built to put as much cargo as you can on board. They're not going to want to take away cargo space in order to accommodate a larger fuel tank. So what needs to happen is the bunkering needs to take place more often. It is in Europe, you can go around Europe, even intra-Asia, you can go around intra-Asia and bunker every once in a while. But let's say some of the long trans-Pacific voyages or to Africa or to Europe, the fuel consumption required is more than can be done just on one tank. So we need to, if the ship leaving Europe, let's say, can take bunker there, it's going to need to take bunker somewhere else along the way. Ports are very competitive. Hong Kong used to be the #1 container terminal in terms of volume in the world. And now we're at #8 because other ports are moving forward, moving ahead, being very aggressive in targeting the cargo business. Having the ability to have LNG bunkering in a port is a tremendous asset, a tremendous value for a ship, let's say the ship coming from Europe. Right now, when he arrives in Asia, he needs to bunker. There are not many bunkering places, particularly ship-to-ship bunkering, which is required for container vessels while cargo operation is being done. So if Hong Kong were to have LNG bunkering facilities at the terminal while cargo operation is being done, that would be a must stop for all of the LNG vessels. And there are a growing number of those. If we don't capitalize on this, other ports will definitely take the lead, and we will continue to see Hong Kong lose in terms of cargo volume. I will add, we're not that far away, actually. With the FSRU that is being planned for this year, we have the ability. What is needed now is the ability to have the ship-to-ship bunkering. And in order for us to be able to do that, we need to have the guidelines. We need to have the regulatory oversight, the restrictions. How is this going to be done? And at the moment, we don't have that. Other areas, other terminals are moving ahead. Singapore has already completed successfully a ship-to-container liner vessel for one of the mega vessels. So we really need to get on board here.
Okay, well, thank you, Roberto. I want to follow up on 2 points. One is you talk about Hong Kong as a maritime hub and the competitiveness and port competition. Now, on that, I would like to ask Tom, because I know some of your ships actually also operate in Asia. So where do you bunker now? What if Hong Kong also provide LNG bunkering? As you said, you might consider coming to Hong Kong more often. Is that correct?
So yeah, obviously we'd love to be able to restart more and more in the Far East, because that is a key marketplace for us. At the moment, we currently don't have any of our LNG vessels scheduled to deploy to that region, but that's not to say we wouldn't do that in the future. You know, we're already looking at the Arabian Gulf. We're looking further and further west as we move through the East Coast, through Central Caribbean, out towards the West Coast of the States. So it won't be too long before there's opportunities in the Far East. And clearly with Singapore taking a lead, Hong Kong can then link onto that. And as we see China beginning to decarbonize, clearly those are the kind of regions where we're going to see opportunity in the future. So I'm not going to make any promises about when we'll bring a ship there, but we'd love to see that opportunity being available, so that makes it much, much easier for us to do so.
Okay, well, thank you, Tom. That's good to hear. Now, Roberto, on the second point, it's about, Hong Kong actually is not ready in terms of having the safety regulation and other procedures. But we also heard from Case. Case, can you unmute yourself? Because we would like to ask you a question.
Of course.
Now, I think in your presentation, you emphasized a few times, I mean, it's a long journey to get the safety management plan right. But do you think Hong Kong has to follow the same long journey? Or actually, what can we learn from Rotterdam or from other international standards and regulations? What's your take?
Now, quite simple. You can do it much faster than we did it in Rotterdam, because we have to start from scratch. But on this moment, you have the safety frameworks already in place. Well, you have to change port regulations, that for sure, because it must be allowed to do the bunkering. But you got a reference for what is safe already from all the publication mentioned in all the presentations. You know how to deal with simultaneous operations. You can use the tools from the ERPH for the operational safety, for auditing the bunker operator, and for the check of the terminal. So it can be done quite, and you have a huge of experience nowadays from the industry, from the cruise vessels, but also from the container vessels as well. So you can use this experience, and I think the only hurdle is the local regulations. Make sure that you cover it properly. That's the item. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Case. Now, since you're on the mic, can I ask you another question? You mentioned Rotterdam started to think about or handle LNG bunkering back in 2011. Can you tell us, other than attracting more bunkering businesses to Rotterdam, because you're saying it's now a major industry, what are the other benefits, for example, economically or other kinds of benefits that LNG bunkering actually bring to Rotterdam and the wider area?
Well, the largest winners, of course, are the people living in Rotterdam, because you got a huge reduction of SOx, NOx, and particle matters, and even for climate, you have a reduction and that's of course what's meant to be the result of changing to alternative fuels. That's one. It also attracts, of course, because we have our bunker infrastructure in place. You can see it attracts also the shipping companies that have vessels sailing on LNG. And of course, before they came to Rotterdam, we already joined all kind of programs and also funding programs from Europe to make sure that we can help our stakeholders to take this decision to change over to LNG. That's also important. So as a port, you have to be supportive to the stakeholders in your port. Maybe even think about incentives. We have an incentive scene in our port for all ships that are sustainable. So not only for LNG, but it helps a little bit. But at the end, the industry have to take the decision to do this investment decision. So if we can support as a port, we will do it.
Okay, thank you, Case. Tom, we have a question for you. It's quite technical. The question asks, can you elaborate more why 20% biomethane blend in LNG can achieve 34% carbon reduction?
Well, I answered that in the chat already, I think, but basically you've already got a reduction in carbon emission by the use of LNG. The amount will vary depending upon which engine type you use. If you're using a high pressure, slow speed two-stroke, you'll have the highest amount of carbon reduction compared to utilizing a high speed diesel or an Otto cycle diesel like we've used. When you then add in the biomethane, which might be net zero or might be slightly positive, but by any terms would usually be significantly below the conventional LNG, that's how you get to those higher numbers. If you used 100% biomethane, it came fully from a full sustainable source where, in fact, it would otherwise escape to atmosphere. You could get to a net zero, you could get to a negative emissions, but at the moment that is not sustainable. There's no commercial viability in that source yet. But as Kees will know, in Rotterdam, we're beginning to see the availability of biomethane and reduced emissions fuels coming on more and more. And I think we're now beginning to see that happening in Northern Europe. You could do it in the States in a few locations, but it is something that we're pushing very hard, because up until now, most of the discussion in the maritime sector has been about ammonia and these other fuels. We certainly think that, as I said, you've got to have drop-in fuels, and this will allow us to find a way to faster decarbonize.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Now back to Roberto. I know that the association has been, having conversation with the government from time to time about not just LNG probably, but about, any clean fuel options and bunkering options. So can you share with us, where we are in terms of the readiness to have LNG bunkering? Do you think the government is favorable to this proposal? If not, then what needs to be done to get them on board, to get the buy-in?
That's a good question. Yes, government has indicated their support. They have said Hong Kong as a major port of the world, we need to decarbonize. They've said that we need to preserve Hong Kong's position as a maritime center. But moving from policy to action is actually difficult in Hong Kong. And in part, it has to do with the structure of the way Hong Kong is set up, governance. In order for us to move this agenda forward, there needs to be coordination between the different departments, different bureaus. And I think Hong Kong's governance style makes this a little bit difficult. What I personally find often is that we see different departments lobbying or fighting each other for different resources or agendas that are on parallel planes. And in order for us to be able to move this forward, we really need all of the departments, all of the bureaus to move in the same direction with a common strategic objective. Same as is done in many other countries. In Singapore, in China, we see that when there is a target, everybody comes in behind. There is no need to be pulling one party or another. Now, in order for us to correct that or to improve that in Hong Kong, I think I would make two suggestions. One is that we need a dedicated bureau, government bureau, that focuses on maritime transportation. Right now, we have the Transport and Housing Bureau. So we're sharing a limited number of people, resources, and an office that is focusing on housing, which is one of the biggest problem areas in Hong Kong, and also public transportation. And then there is also this international trade part. So we need attention that is focused on maritime matters. Secondly, we need a strategic, empowered statutory maritime authority, similar to what exists in China or in Singapore, where there's the MPA, where when an idea is presented, the parties can discuss it, the industry can come on board, and then there's the full force of the entire government that's going in that direction. We have the Maritime Port Board that has some great ideas, but it doesn't, we're lacking that push from behind the government coming together. I think the Transport Housing Bureau is very supportive. The Marine Department, they understand the importance of LNG. They understand the importance of maritime business for Hong Kong, but it is a struggle to get the full power of the government behind these issues. The chief executive has numerous times mentioned how we need to have a separate transport bureau, but that hasn't happened yet. I think we really need to move forward quickly on this. We cannot afford to wait another 2, 3, 5 years because otherwise we will lose out the market. And when we do lose out the market, the consumers, the people of Hong Kong are the ones that are going to suffer.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think, Roberto, that's very good news. And well, a big challenge ahead because, as you said, I mean, in terms of the way governance has been arranged, we all know the same story. I mean, it's difficult to get the right departments together, aligned in terms of the vision and goals. But once we have that common vision, I think there are opportunities for everyone to work together.
Yes.
Now, Tom and Case, do you have anything to add in terms of working with governments? And, or, if I, put this question to you, what do you have to say to the Hong Kong government on behalf or based on your experience from Rotterdam and, of course, Tom with Carnival as an operator?
Well, as a port of Rotterdam, the same story looks really the same as we did 5-6 years ago, talking with all the authorities, all the other authorities in port, environmental authorities. And there is always a little bit friction between the authorities that are there for housing people, for developing living quarters, and the authorities that are responsible for the port and port operations. So we have to talk a lot. We work in cooperation together, and you have to put a lot of effort in make sure that everybody is at the same line, and then indeed to have a strategy in mind, and a strategy that all the involved authorities will deal with and will back up. That's important. So I totally agree.
Thank you. And Tom?
So this Case knows very well, it's been a challenge working in some locations. I will say, though, that it was a pleasure working with Rotterdam. That was our first experience. And frankly, we've based everything we've done on what the experience we've had in Rotterdam today. And I usually say this when I go into other places: if you can do it in Rotterdam, you can do it anywhere, because they were the most onerous, they were the most challenging, but they were the first. And that's such. That's okay, Case. I think it was a useful exercise. And it took us quite a long time before we actually put a cruise ship to do a ship-to-ship operation down at the Wilhelmshaven Pier. But I will say, what I do find is that when we go into the first time into a new location and we ask the question, so who's actually going to put their name to the piece of paper that says you can do your bunkering operation, can do your SIMOPS, I'm usually met by a lot of blank stares. And what's very clear is that there is, as Case has said, there is a lot of guidance out there today. You don't want to do this alone. The most frustrating thing we find as operators is when we go into a new port where all of a sudden a very well-meaning official decides that he's going to start writing a new set of rules and regulations all by himself. Yeah. Because that is his responsibility as he feels it. We really encourage the different destinations to reach out to those kind of organizations that have the membership, both from the ports and the other authorities, so that they can share those experiences. What IAPH has done, what SGMF has done, where CLNG is more on the commercial side, but again, on the commercial side, where you look at that, there's a large group of people today that have gone through this exercise. Up to date, so far, we've not had any major stumbling blocks. We've had a few in Southern Europe where there's been some challenges, particularly, as I said before, where you've not had an infrastructure already around gas. You go to Rotterdam, you go to Barcelona, you go to Singapore, places like that. Typically, they've had gas import facilities or export facilities, and therefore the authorities understand the fuel you're talking about. But I think what's really important from our side is talk to everybody and don't try and do this alone. Share your experiences, learn from the experiences elsewhere. It's very, very possible. When I last came to Hong Kong before COVID started, and we had discussions with the authorities there around what you're looking at doing and linking to your infrastructure that you're building there with the floating storage unit, etc. It makes so much sense to build bunkering into that kind of plan, because then it's ready. Then it can be utilized. We're even talking about doing offshore bunkering in cruise ships from time to time. But if you look at what Shell and Total and all the others are doing, bunkering is happening pretty much every day at the moment, all around the world. It's being done offshore. It's being done right, like in Rotterdam, right in the center of heavily, densely populated cities. And it's being done safely. So I don't think there's anything to be frightened about. And I think clearly the authorities have an important role to play, because if the authorities are happy, then generally the population will be happy. One thing we've learned in those new locations is if you get the fire department on site, usually everything runs happily, because whether they like it or not, the fire department is the one that the local population believe in.
Well, thank you, Tom, Case, and Roberto for helping us to end this webinar on a positive note. I think it's clear that we have great experience from ports like Rotterdam. We already have a lot of good examples in terms of regulations and guidelines, and also a lot of training going on. And so Hong Kong shouldn't start from scratch. And with Roberto's remark, saying actually the government is supportive of the idea. So it is now for BEC working closely with the industry to engage the government. And I think Wayne earlier on mentioned that our report will be published within April. But I think the real start of the challenge and the real work is, having engagement with the government and try to convince them that this is the way to go. So with that, thank you everyone for staying till the very end. I apologize once again for, overrunning a little bit, but it seems like, you're all enjoying the conversation. We still have 75, I think, participants are staying with us. With that, thank you once again for all the speakers, all the participants for different parts of the world, and I wish you a good evening. Thank you.